Welcome to Powered by Instinct, a podcast for professionals who think about how your fundamental nature drives performance. In each episode, Kolbe experts will interview top performers, team leaders, consultants, and coaches to discuss identifying team members' strengths, aligning those strengths with their jobs, and optimizing individual and team performance. If you're interested in getting more done more naturally, then let's jump in.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Powered by Instinct. We're super happy today to have Hutton Henry from Beyond M&A. Actually, Hutton, it's funny I say from Beyond M&A because that's your current job, but you're from all kinds of different places. So fascinating a background and professional life. So we'll talk about that. But Hutton, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. It's a real pleasure to be here with you.
So first of all, we should introduce your Kolbe results since, it's the Powered by Instinct blog. So why don't you do that? And the numbers, of course, but a little bit about what it means to you.
Of course, thanks. So I'm a 2295. So I'm an initiating quick start. And it was very enlightening to find out what it meant to me because it basically matched the fact that I do things in a very quick way. I do bottom line and get things very quickly. I'm not rude. I just understand things and I help build things. And I think the key one, the focus tends to be on my 9, but the real one is my 5 is I love building things. I've had periods in my career where I've not been hands-on and have been worried and disappointed. And having this understanding today has really helped.
Fabulous. Thanks. And a reminder for people, because you don't probably remember mine, I'm an 8273. So Hutton, with you, I share that initiating quick start. But then the other one that I lead with really is my 8 in Fact Finder. So lots of detail, information, dig deep, ask questions. So I don't know, sometimes that makes me a good podcast host because I have lots of questions. Sometimes I can take it too far. So, hey, we're opposite ends of the spectrum on that one, but we'll show the audience how we can, work together really easily.
It's a great start already. I mean, because because we work with so many CEOs and I've seen that you can get the ones that if you've got very data-driven ones, they're the ones that are really going to scale a business. And from my experience, I can look at their data. And so, but from my side, we're very good at setting things up, but we may not have the right view on data to scale.
Yeah. So you just mentioned there people you work with. I've mentioned Beyond M&A, which is the company that you started. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, and then we'll kind of go backward because, as I said, you've got a really rich professional history too. So.
Well, thanks. So right now I'm working with VC, private equity investors and corporate investors. And quite simply, we assess companies on their behalf, in particular on tech teams. So the practice is called technology due diligence. But really, if you think of us like house surveyors, we come in, we check things out, and we go back to the investor and explain to them in layman terms how that technology operates. And a big part of that. And my mission is to sort of ask people to really understand it's the people that matter, that they're the people who build that technology. So
I think most people would not necessarily put those two together, technology and people. Why do you see that? I mean, most people think, look, if you're doing due diligence on technology, it's all about the software, the hard, whatever those traditional tech items. Why do you think people are so important?
Well, it's an interesting thing because the technology is the tangible output, and that's the thing that you can track and measure. But actually, I personally think from experience, if we don't look after the teams, then what you'll tend to find is they start to worry, and there's so many things that can happen through an M&A transaction. And to make it very clear, 25 years ago or so, I had a very large project, which pretty much was a failure because we didn't look at the people. We looked at the technology. We looked at the tangible thing. And that's been a theme throughout my career. And it's a bit different in my market, if I'm honest.
So how do you go about that when you're working with a client and looking at a potential acquisition or investment?
Yeah, I mean, you might be surprised to hear, but you'll see on every single investor's website, that they do buy into management team, and that's definitely there. But the bit that's surprising is they are very people focused, and they really want to look after. I mean, it's a relationship in the first place to agree to be invested in or acquired, and so both parties really want to relate with each other. That's this sort of umbrella. And my light's gone off. Sorry.
It's all right. We can still see you.
And so, really, there's a couple of ways in. So we have a pre-deal position, and also we help companies after the deal has completed. And so, it can work either way. We will run Kolbe assessments before a deal for certain investors who are open to this, and where it's appropriate to the deal. So everyone will look at the sensitivity of what's going to happen and say, well, you know what? It would be really interesting to know what's there. And what I'm really looking for is a couple of factors. Number one is the innovation piece. That's really what investors are looking for. I mean, they tend to be buying something that's working well and they want to scale it. And the other piece that is also very interesting is systemization. So that's the follow through aspect. So if we can look at an entire team and say to them with data, we think you're very strong at this. And, that's how we can create extra value. We can improve the value creation plan through this. It's a wonderful place to be, because it's not pointing fingers or personal. It's looking at the team as a whole.
Do people get that? I mean, how much do you have to educate them about what Kolbe is or Conation, or do you just kind of say, here's information that I have and here's what it's going to do? What's your approach?
So people, I think it's in its infancy stages on due diligence, on the pre-deal stage. When we have done it, people really get it and they love the output. It's one page in a deck, right? Being able to assess the team. And I think, to be fair, the people that have got it in the early stages over the last 5 years have had an interest in psychology or in some form of that in their educational work. So they're very open to, okay, let's open this up. But they're also going to sell the idea to management. So there's three parties involved here, really. And once they see it, they really like the data. So,
and then how do you use it? How do you work with the clients, first of all, post-transaction? And because you've talked about trying to bring it in early, but it sounds like more often you usually use it afterward. What does that look like?
It is. And to be fair, that's probably where you can really create value over the long term. A very common scenario post-transaction is that the company has been building for a period of time, maybe a year or so, and the communication has started to falter between the investor and the team because if you look at it from a monetary or P&L perspective, maybe they're not reaching the goals that they promised before the deal. And so often we're brought in post-deal, say, can you please translate what the team is doing? So translating what they're doing will be obviously the tech output, but also let's have a look at the makeup of the team. Yeah. And we could do that subjectively. We can interview people, but this is much more effective. And we find people are very open to it at that stage.
That's a little surprising to me that people are open to it, because it sounds like you're brought in usually in that circumstance when things aren't going well. I would think there'd be more skepticism.
And also you would assume, I would have assumed that the investors come in and say, you must work with this company. But what really happens is a collaborative process where both parties understand that they need to improve something. They've had bad board meetings. Something's not going right. And not only do we have to be brought in, but usually the portfolio company has to pay for us. So it's a really interesting sort of triangle of discussion at the beginning. But what you'll find is we become, especially myself, I become really close with the tech leader. We understand what's happening and how they've been sort of working. And I mean, I'm augmenting this. So we've got Kolbe at the core, but then I've got tech skills and things like public speaking. Getting if I look at what they're presenting to the investors, I'm like, no wonder this is not going well. Right. Because they're just taking far too long to explain something.
Yeah.
So
is there a common, people ask us all the time, oh, tell us what, a position looks like from a Kolbe result perspective. Do you
Yeah.
see common themes with the tech leaders and either the results or just kind of what's going wrong in
Yeah.
those situations
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
can fix?
Yeah. I'll give you two scenarios. So when we looked at the number of people we've assessed over the years, there is a kind of a common shape within the tech teams of a high fact finder with follow through. So like an 8-6, maybe a 2-3, something like that. And we would say around 90% of tech teams are made up with people of that type. And so working with that type of profile, we tend to find that those people go into so much detail that they need to be able to summarize it and present it in a more engaging way.
Mm-hmm.
So that can help. We have had situations where you've got people with my type of profile and they're just trying too many things at once, and it's driving the investors mad, right? Because they're like, well, we're spending all this money and the term that I've always remembered, like, these guys cannot land their planes. They're like,
They've got a new destination and never a landing, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. So they're the common scenarios. For CTOs, what I've found over time is a high fact finder with a co-action on quick start. I've worked with them. They are fabulous in that level.
So you do come from a tech background. You have worked in the industry for years. What did it look like for you as, your 2295? How did you make that work? Because you're describing that that's not the typical Kolbe result in the industry.
Yeah, I think that was the biggest thing I learned from my profile. Genuinely, I was like, wow, look at this difference. Because I guess as a kid, I taught myself to code as an 8-year-old. And so it was a hobby. So my personality is just very driven to build something. And I liked the building aspect of that. And I think what really happened when I was a kid is I'd learned all of the logic and the type of things that are not really naturally me. But I didn't do any schooling. I didn't do any homework. I did nothing, exams. I did nothing, absolutely zero. But I did all of this because it was like building all the time. And I think when I look back, that was the 80s. And actually, no, it was 70s, sorry. And so what, that long ago. And I think I got instant gratification that would have fed. If you compare a book with something that responded to you all the time, it was quicker. But I also had no guardrails and no rules. So it was like this freedom to build anything I wanted to. And long story short, I was very lucky that I hit a job that was effectively a hobby. And that's really why I fitted. I didn't really fit the corporate world. My first job was with Ford and I was with them just under 10 years and went all over the world and built loads of good things. And that was down to the support of lots of other very, great people. And also the fact there were probably lots of fact finders around me organizing my chaos. But there was a part of me that just didn't, I had an amazing career, but there was a part of me that thought this is not really me. So.
And would you think that was the 9 in quick start that you weren't getting to use enough, or?
There were so many factors, David. I think now I have reflection and I have the data and I've tried so many things. I do understand it fully now, but and I try and put myself back to then, all I knew that was something was wrong.
Right.
And that I needed to move, and I took a very risky move of leaving a very brilliant job into something that wasn't brilliant at the time and consulting. And I did, a good 12 or 13 years of that before setting up my business. So I like to say that I'm a really slow learner. It seems to take me a decade to learn a lesson. And that's that really.
So let's talk about your author, also an author. I think the first book you wrote was People First, right?
Yeah. It's a really good table mat. Yeah, thank you. I genuinely use it mostly as a mouse mat. And that was really, it's a big factor around M&A. And there was two things, if we talk about technology being this tangible thing, I'd been to this conference and Steve Ballmer, the head of Microsoft at the time, said it was like a cloud first, mobile first world. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, no, it's about people, which is where the title comes from. And, interestingly, I wrote it 5 years ago. Still the same things are happening, right? Because it's all around bringing groups of people together and making hard decisions about how to grow a business. I totally understand that, really.
But it sounds like, you wrote the book because that's your thought on it, but it sounds like most of your clients at least kind of agree with that approach, that they're, as you were describing it, they're investing in management teams and leadership teams, and they see that as really the key. So
yeah,
was there resistance from some people? Because you're describing Steve Ballmer kind of taking a different approach and not talking about people first. So is there a tug of war? Or do you think there's kind of consensus that the people part is really important, just maybe mysterious, even though important?
I think it's changed drastically. I went to a conference last year here in London, and the conference brochure, like this really glossy A4 thing. And when I looked at the agenda for 3 days, I would say 50% of that agenda was about people.
Wow.
It would never have happened before. It was the typical topics, because people are curious about how do we get innovation and how do we make teams productive and happy. And let's not even talk about working from home, right? I mean, it's just, there's so many factors there. And it just struck me when I look at that, and it's like, I'd never seen, it was quite a significant conference as well. So yeah, I do think people have changed, but there's two different scenarios. That book was really written around corporate acquisition of small companies. And the world that I work in is really now investors who invest in smaller firms that are scaling and growing. So I think the vantage point and the approach is a bit different.
So less of a people first mindset on the corporate acquisition side than on the VC acquisition side?
Definitely at the time when I was writing that. And I'm definitely seeing my corporate clients definitely.
So they're changing too.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
So then you've written another book, DOA, Diversity of Action. Tell us, do you have one of those too? I want to see.
I don't actually, unfortunately, no. So that was probably because these are both pre-pandemic endeavors. And what I realized was that it's not fair to ask people to read a book. Yeah. I mean, attention span, etc. And I needed to get this across to my key people when I work with tech teams, and not the people who bought into it, not the people who are even open to it. It's the people who do this. I mean, they cross their arms and they look at me and they shake their heads, and we'd say, we have a team thing of like, they've got a PhD in unhappiness in that moment, and I want to change that crossing of their arms to relaxing and being open. And sometimes they are the most aggressive people in the room initially, and they become your best support. Anyway, the idea was that if I could turn some of the concepts and ideas into a graphic novel, which it is, I would happily and proudly put that on people's desks when we ran a session, because I'm not asking for too much of your time to find a relevant story for you to sort of look into, really, then. So
you mentioned pre-pandemic and working from home. What do you see moving forward? What do you think kind of either the tech world or the M&A world, how are things going to be different moving forward? Or do you think we go back to kind of more or less what it was before the pandemic?
That's a really tough question, isn't it? I mean,
don't worry, I won't hold you accountable for it. But I love asking people, because I think it's an unusual time in the world and certainly in business, where things changed so rapidly, and we don't know. I mean, you never know what's going to happen moving forward, but I think there are greater possibilities for change, but that doesn't necessarily mean they always happen. Sometimes there is a retrenchment, but I love asking lots of people who think about this kind of stuff, and you obviously do. So give us your thoughts.
Yeah. I will take it out of the world of tech and just say that I met a friend of mine who, she'd opened a beautiful restaurant recently, and I went and I was like, wow, this is stunning. It's so nice. And she looked at me and said, it is, but the world has changed. It's so hard to get people to come to a restaurant, and she's experienced, and she's got over a decade's experience with that. So I've spoken recently with a charity. I kind of like working with them, and I do like working with them, but I was having a discussion with them, and they help children, and they would talk about how the children would probably love to use these free facilities, but the parents don't really want to do all of the traveling anymore. So the amount of driving we were doing in the past and things, moving the children around is not acceptable anymore. And I found that quite sort of worrying on one side. Having young children myself, I would like them to have the opportunities I had, which was to meet lots of other similar people and learn from each other. On a more positive note, in a tech meeting this morning, speaking to a leader of a good business, he said, look, people are coming back. The amount of time they're spending in the office is doubling. So I think it's like a Rubik's Cube of what, your preferences. And that means if we take your Kolbe profile and therefore some of your natural abilities may be with or without people is one side, then you're perfect, what you like, but also where you are in your career and your age. And I think that would kind of put you in sort of a quadrant of where you'd rather be. And that's a way more complex answer than just saying it's hybrid, because I think it's different for everybody, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
So,
I wasn't expecting a simple, easy answer, because I agree with you. It is.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of it this way, but the analogy of the Rubik's Cube, where you move one piece and the other pieces move as a result. So it's not just a matter of flipping a lever, like out of office, in the office. It isn't that simple.
What are you seeing on let's say?
I'm seeing, well, let me start with the restaurant stuff, because using that as an example, I'm seeing, definitely a rebound, a bounce back to people wanting to be out and with people and be a bit more social. I have 4 kids myself. They're they're 24, 22, and then 2 19-year-olds. I'm seeing that there's I think going to be a more lasting change with that younger cohort who went through it in a time in their lives when it's a more formative era in their lives. I think for people our age, it's easier maybe to revert to, let's get back to more what it was. I want to do more of those, get back to those patterns I was in before. And not that they'll ever be exactly the same, but the patterns that were set for younger cohorts, I don't know. I mean, let's talk about the unknown. But I'm kind of thinking it will change them more permanently. And I don't think that means, so looking at my kids and their extended groups, it's not that they don't want to go out. They do, but I think it's different. I think they may always relate to those social environments in a different way. And like you're saying, the day-to-day kind of traveling, not the traveling for fun, because I think that at least they want to get back into that. They miss that. But the traveling day-to-day stuff, commuting to work, as you're saying, people are kind of questioning, why on earth would we want to do that? Why do I want to drive half an hour, 45 minutes each way to get to an office when I can be productive at home and we've proven it? But again, it isn't that simple binary on and off. It's a whole system, because there are also, lots of younger people who are saying, I don't want that job because it's not in the office enough, and I need to be in an office to learn stuff from other people. I think it's easier. And I agree with that. So it's this complex, interwoven dynamic. So,
I predict 2 things. Having watched, my daughter the youngest is 8, but she would have been around 5 or 6. And I think they've witnessed restrictions, and therefore that will be quite deep and embedded, that, you can put a restriction on, the whole world shuts down. None of us have seen that before.
Right.
And I would predict there's going to be a big wave of sort of hippie behavior in like 15 years. It's like, we're just going to react and just have a great time. Is my kind of my positive spin on it. But I genuinely think they'll be like, we don't want that type of thing to happen because it happens so young.
Yeah.
The other thing, and it's a huge thing with the AI stuff with Chat GPT and that is, I think it's going to be the period of the visionaries, because your visionaries are going to be able to come up with ideas, and they can push ideas. It's like, let's build this, let's do this, and you're not going to have the same thing. It's going to be quite an interesting period.
So when you say visionary, does that equate to a particular Kolbe result for you?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, I think it's around the quick starts, and I'd been doing a lot of work last year before ChatGPT in that area, and there were other tools out beforehand,
Right.
and they literally, I've got an article coming out this week about the era of the co-pilots. That you're literally going to have this person, this thing beside you. And even now, I don't know about yourself, but when I use ChatGPT, I talk to it. I'll say, thank you. Can you do this, please? I don't say, I don't demand things. It's like a personality at the other side.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that, really, and how that affects how we think.
And
So,
how do you think it does affect the way we think?
what do you remember? What did you think around how we changed to GPS maps? It's significant, isn't it? And there's a program that's in both of our countries, The Apprentice,
Yeah.
if you know that, yeah. And they had an episode recently where the apprentices, these grown people had to go around with a map. That was the funny, sort of amusing thing. And none of them could use a map. It was like 20 people. So yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah. Technology has changed so much in terms of things that we were used to for, maps. Essentially, 300 years or something, they've been widely available. Before that, that was kind of the technology of the day almost, was to have a map and, have it painted on your wall, because things didn't change very much. It was going to be that way for decades. And yeah, that's all changing. So what do you think, if the initiating quick start, you see that era, what about all these, you were describing initiating fact finders, tech leaders, what do they do?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because you've also got another thing going on with this low code movement. So you're not needing as much. So I think what you're going, my
Explain
thought.
low code movement for people.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah. So
Including me, like I vaguely know what it is, but not to the level you do.
No, I mean, well, I think the good thing about it is it's not meant to have much understanding. It's really like, if you have a business problem, I don't know, maybe you want to keep track of certain things in your life, and you can you can build that technology without having to go to a technical person. So it's like a drag and drop. If the simplistic version is, I want to keep track of my phone calls with this certain person, let me write an app for that. So you design it, your ideas drive it. So I think what's going to happen is that people from other parts of the business will start to come into technology teams, which has always been the nirvana. It's always been, right. Can we not get these people talking together? But you're not going to, I wouldn't predict you're not going to need as many of these people, the eights and the fact finders. Of course you will be. But I think there would be a much more of a mixture of people who think differently.
Has that been a problem for tech teams in the past, that they haven't had that diversity?
Yeah, I mean, definitely it's in the comic that so I actually think it's been a problem for business. It's also been a benefit if you're not one of those people in tech, because you run circles around those teams. Like you take those planes off, and as long as you can land them,
yeah,
you've come up with a new idea and a new approach. I used to get in a lot of trouble when I was younger, and I didn't understand it. I'd get these, it's because I'd just go off and do something, and I wouldn't debate it, and then you'd find out that was a problem. And I just think in one way we have to look at these things positively. It's like, okay, that's going to be automated, that's going to be easier, but it's a case of one person can't do it all anyway. So we're just going to have to make sure we get that diversity in teams. And that's probably the number one thing. If I look at the good case studies of the Kolbe work we've done, if we'll look at a team of 50 or 70, there was one where they weren't making enough sales. And it's like, well, no wonder, because virtually everyone was a fact finder follow through, including the founders. And so they did work out where that differentiation was, where the innovation was coming from, was their customers. So they were feeding those aspects really.
So how did you make that work earlier in your career? I mean, you described it as it was an advantage because you could come in and kind of run circles around them, but how did you keep from just annoying them because you were so different?
I just broke the rules all the time. I mean, like, I was probably seen as quite childish, but if there was a time where you had to be at work at 9 till 5, I would be there at different times. But it was really, I think most of my bad behavior was always for a good cause. So people liked the outcome. It wasn't like, well, you didn't do the right thing and look at what mess you've made. It's like, okay, you've cut a corner, but I'm quite happy with that. Just don't do it again.
So, I know you a bit, not super well, but then also, the audience can get a feel for you.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that it's also because you're just a likable person. I mean, you even say please and thank you to ChatGPT. I think maybe you figured out that part of it. You would annoy them, maybe break rules, but you would be very pleasant as you're doing it. Do you think that affective part was in there, and am I totally off base?
Probably. I mean, I'm not offensive if that's what we're saying, but I mean, yeah, I mean, I do watch for what people really want. It's kind of a big part of what I'm trying to do. So that can be to my own detriment, right? I mean, it's sort of, but I enjoy what I do. I mean, what it does remind me of, David, is that one of the other things I got from the reading was, as a kid, I mean, I joked around the fact that I didn't do any education at all. And I had a really naughty behavior of every day when I finished school, I threw all of my books, whatever I'd written, in the bin. I did that throughout my whole, I mean, it'd be a parent's nightmare. It would be my nightmare today. And so later on, I got an education, but I only did it in things I was interested in. I didn't do tech. I did screenwriting, did 9 years of that. I absolutely loved it. But the thing when I got my result, and it took me a while for me to understand, and I went back to Lisa in the team. I was like, wow, I totally understand this, because I always thought that I wasn't doing well at school because I'd had weird upbringing, and it just meant, no one was watching, and I was being quite delinquent at school. But what I got from the Kolbe result was actually, this is just you. You don't need that type of very structured academia. Didn't really fit.
Right.
And so instead of, it changed my story from somebody that was not able to do something because of a disadvantage, as in education, to actually it quite suited me. I just didn't realize.
Right.
You could have given me the best school in the world and I still would have done the same.
You would have maybe just gone through the motions, but you would have created a very similar system, even in that. Yeah, that's fascinating. So we've talked almost all about business stuff, but you just mentioned you love screenwriting. How have you seen your Kolbe results play out in non-business things for you in your personal life?
Yeah, so when I was quite a bit younger, I used to do like a challenge in a month. So it would be like, I would spend 1 month
self-directed.
Yeah, absolutely. So something like, I remember, because I was living in shared accommodation with young people, having a great time, and I'd announce, right, I'm going to learn cooking. There's a big guy, Jamie Oliver here, that, is a cook, yeah?
He's big
and
here
I'd
too.
Yeah, I think he's done okay, isn't he?
Yeah, he has.
And I'd take his book and I would literally spend the whole month cooking for everyone, and everyone loved the food. My bank balance didn't like that at all because it was really expensive. But I got a little bit of a reputation of, and I still do it today, around learning. And so, it's something I really enjoy, but it's also has to be in things that are quite fun. So right now, as a family, we're all learning to ice skate. So we go once a week religiously, and I'm not as good as the kids, but I mean, it's good fun. So I've seen that. I think one thing it does teach you is it's okay to stop and start. Because as a young person, I would have started things and I would have seen people do things and they'd be very methodical, and just that would be their whole life. And with me, I'd be like a machine gun, like, let's try this, let's try that. But then feel guilty for starting and not finishing things. On the social bit, sorry.
Well, I was going to ask, did getting your Kolbe result help you not feel guilty about not finishing, or had you kind of figured that out before you got your Kolbe result?
Yeah, I mean, I got reminded last week by Stephanie in the Kolbe team, right? Because I think if you have that habit, you always give yourself a hard time. But what you have to realize is that, like, I open a lot of doors, and often those doors I open on behalf of other people. So, it's okay to have that sort of, it goes with the innovation quite well because you don't get stuck. And so it does mean I've tried so many things, and those things are travel and hobbies and gosh, so many different things. So to answer your question, yeah, I still feel guilty about it, but the profile tells me that it's okay.
Yeah. So I share your to and follow through. So I think I share a little bit of that guilty feeling of, but I didn't finish that. And yeah, I don't know that I've known my Kolbe result most of my life because my mom came up with it when I was pretty young, but there's still that nagging, other people, society kind of teaches you, finish what you start. That's a value. And if you don't do it, there's something wrong. And look, admittedly, there's some things that you just have to finish. You have to file your tax return and you don't get to use your to and follow through as an excuse, but so much of figuring out the way to be successful in life is to figure out, hey, this is who I am. This is, how am I going to make it work who I am? How am I going to make that work with what I'm doing? And understanding that you're not all things to all people. You're not going to be the brilliant, innovative, initiating quick start like you are and not have other parts of you that are, different, that maybe don't fit every scenario. But yeah, that's a process. I don't think that ever ends. Kind of like you're learning. It shouldn't ever end.
Yeah.
You're just always figuring it out, honing it in. And
I think there's a big part of this trust, isn't it?
Yeah.
You trust the world, but you also trust the people around you, whether it's home, work, wherever, or play. I think even as a kid, you get a kind of a label within your friendship circles of being the person who does X, Y, Z. And I guess as you get older, you understand why that happens, which is great because then you can push in even and lean in on it harder.
And some of it's trust. I think it's also you end up, when you do it well, respecting the other people who aren't like you because you appreciate, wow, they're going to make my life easier. I do my thing, but I need them.
Yeah.
So, and yes, I can trust that they're going to do those things that I may not do, but you realize over time, my life would be less rich and fulfilling without those people helping me out and doing the things that aren't natural for me, but still need to happen in my life and in the world. But
yeah.
Well, you know what? Let's maybe wrap it up on that because I think that's a nice happy note. And we've been chatting for a while. So Hutton, really appreciate you being here today. If people are interested in getting your books, learning more about your business, where should they go?
Possibly the best ways, I post on LinkedIn. So Hutton Henry is probably the best thing to look up on there. So
great. Well,
thank you for having me. It's been really good to catch up.
Yeah. Hopefully I'll see you next time I'm over in England.
Yeah. Or maybe in Arizona.
Or in Arizona. Yeah. Well, great to see you, Hutton, and everybody else. Thanks for joining. We will see you on the next episode of Powered by Instinct.
Thanks, David. Take care.
Cheers.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Powered by Instinct. This show is brought to you by Kolbe Corp, a company that helps leaders and organizations thrive using the only instinctive strengths assessment on the market. If you enjoyed this episode, then follow Powered by Instinct wherever you get your favorite podcasts, or join us online at kolbe.com/podcast for all the latest episodes.